Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the House Public Safety Homeland Security meeting, and I want to welcome y'all here today. We have several bills on the calendar, and we're going to start going through these. Most of these have already been vetted, except for the ones that we thought might have a little bit easier to move on through, and so we'll be moving with those. If I might first, could everybody that's got a cell phone, would you kindly reach into your pocket, pull your cell phone out, and either cut it on vibrate or cut it off, include myself. Cool. All right. Call this meeting to order. The first bill that we have up today is House Bill 280. Chairman Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you House Bill 280. I am working from LC 410945 for your reference. This is basically the Campus Safety Act that we all heard last year. We are working, it will allow any weapons carry license holder when he or she is any building or real property owned or leased by any public technical school, vocational school, college, or university, or other public institution of post-secondary education. And it doesn't apply on lines 19 through 20. It does not apply to athletic sporting events or fraternity and sorority houses or student housing. Again, on lines 21 through 25, it also does not apply, this is new to the bill this year, so I would direct your attention to that, not apply to preschool space. If at such entrance to the preschool space it is advertised that such preschool space is designated for operations licensed or regulated under Article 1 of Chapter 1A of Title 20, this division shall not apply if such public institution of public secondary education has more than one building. So if the on-campus preschool at Georgia State would be exempted, and only to the carrying of handguns where the licensee is licensed to carry, and only apply to the carrying of handguns which are concealed. That's the crucial part on line 29. And then on line 31 through 38, we basically go through our definition of concealed. It's substantially the same as last year. Handgun shall have the same meaning. That definition is on lines 39 through 40. And then 41 through 44, we again delve into the preschool space, means a room or continuous collection of rooms in a building which are separated from other areas of the building by an electronic mechanism or human staffed point of controlled access and designated for operations, licensed under Article 1 of Chapter 1A of Title 20. So that is the substantive change to the bill, would be the preschool exemption. It's basically the same Campus Safety Act that we had last year. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that the committee members may have.
Thank you, Chairman. Number 18. Are you number 18?
I'm number 18, Mr. Chairman.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my friend, Representative Ballinger, would you go back over line 21 again, please?
Oh, yes.
Pertaining to preschools.
Mm-hmm. Well, it basically, if a preschool space, I don't know if you've been in a preschool lately, but most schools, whenever you first walk in, there's kind of a common area or a lobby area where there's kind of a point by which, you basically enter the classroom space. I don't know if I'm sure you probably, being a good representative, probably participate in preschool week. So we're all pretty much familiar. We go at least once a year into a preschool classroom. So basically, you would be allowed into that kind of common waiting area for your child to come out, maybe if you have to pick them up early for something, or you're just kind of during the course of your day picking them up. But you would not be allowed past that point, essentially, into the classroom space. That would be a prohibited area.
Thank you.
Number 14. Ms. Waits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairwoman Ballinger, I'm just curious, what are your thoughts with respect to the fact that this bill may actually harm the very perpetrators that are guilty of sexual assaults on college campuses involving alcohol, drugs, or any level of intimidation? What are your thoughts on that?
So your statement is this bill would harm perpetrators of sexual assault?
My argument is that we would actually arm the very people who are guilty of committing some of these crimes on college campuses, such as date rape.
If you're going to commit a heinous crime like rape, you're probably not going to stop carrying a weapon because it's against the rules right now.
Frazier.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Chairwoman Ballinger, can you explain to me, this House Bill 280 has a lot of areas that you cannot carry a gun on. So exactly where are we walking around with a gun? We're coming out of our cars, coming onto the campus.
I
We can
think-
carry them inside of the classrooms, but not into the dormitories or fraternities or sororities. So what are we doing? What is the purpose of the gun if we can just leave our vehicles and just walk around on the campus with them?
Well, most of the, because you have to have a weapons carry permit under this piece of legislation, so most of those folks are going to be over 21. Most of the folks that are over 21 have actually vacated campus housing at that point, so they are commuting. And it would, I know as a student at Georgia State, you know, sometimes I would be sitting in class and I would get these little safety alerts saying, oh, well, by the way, there was an armed robbery at that convenience store that you walked by on your way to your car. But because I was a student at Georgia State, I had no means to protect myself. I could not carry, I could not have a firearm, even though I was a mature student. And certainly, you know, should have been able, I think, in my humble opinion, to be able to protect myself, but I was not because of this, you know, because of legislation that doesn't permit us to carry. So it would afford those people the opportunity to defend themselves and to not be victims.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. Yes, ma'am. And can you also explain to me about the students that will not and do not elect to carry a weapon? What is the security reasons for this on campus? Because now we have some students with guns, we have some students without guns. So how are we protecting the students that choose not to carry weapons?
How do we protect people now that choose not to carry weapons?
I want to know are we going to protect them on the college campuses?
Well, I would argue that other statistics will say there were over 1,000 violent felonies on college campuses, so we're not doing a very good job right now. But we are affording, through this piece of legislation, affording them the opportunity to defend themselves.
Thank you.
Number 24, Ms. Taylor, Chairman Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask a couple of questions concerning the students to and from. We had some concerns last year at Georgia State and at Tech where there were some issues particularly harmful to women where they had been attacked. Would this have given them the opportunity to defend themselves?
Yes, it would have. And it also changes the dynamic because if you're a bad guy and you want to do something bad to somebody and you see them walking out of the general classroom building at Georgia State with a backpack over their shoulder, you know they're defenseless. You know they don't have a means of protection. You know that they've been disarmed. So you know that they're easy prey. And you know you can just attack them with pretty much with impunity. So we're changing that dynamic by passing this piece of legislation.
Thank you. If I could follow up, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Again, last year, Georgia State in particular had some armed robberies in their library where the other students could not defend themselves.
Yes, ma'am.
And I had a great concern because the apartment that I stay in when I'm in the legislature, actually, I'm not sure if you recall, there was a shootout right outside my window where, again, the students were unarmed and could not defend themselves.
Yes, this would offer them at least the ability to choose. It's a choice, and it's one that we hope will change the dynamic and make students safer on Georgia's campuses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Glad to see you sitting there. Got a couple questions that I just want to bring up, but I think the folks that signed up on the comment sheet are going to probably talk about. One's professors' offices. Can you just give the committee why they're not on there?
Well, I think it's interesting that of the questions that I have fielded so far, a lot of them deal with sexual assault and they deal with rape. And I think if we're just basically creating victims. If we carve out one particular space that, students can't carry there, I think we're putting our vulnerable female students at risk if we make that a carve out. So I think that's unnecessary, and I think as a female, I should be able to defend myself regardless of if I'm in a professor's office or if I'm in a classroom.
Thank you, ma'am. The other one is about hearing rooms for discipline.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd love to hear just tell the committee why that's not in here.
That was essentially covered under HB 60. Anytime somebody wants to, they can just close it down, make everybody run through, so it's a level playing field. Everybody has been disarmed, not just the good guys or the bad guys, but everybody. So anytime they want to, through a disciplinary hearing or administrative hearing, anything like that on college campuses, they can just put up the security and run everybody through that metal detector and disarm everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Very good. Number 19, Representative Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting today, Representative Ballinger. My question is, it appears that we've outlined several places where we're restricting the carrying of these weapons. And so that tells me that there should be some reasonable approach to what we make exceptions. So if we're going to allow for weapons to be prohibited from certain areas, and then list the areas that they're permitted, aren't we picking winners and losers? Aren't we making exceptions to the Second Amendment? Aren't we making exceptions to this bill?
Is there a question?
Well, the question is, why are we restricting some areas for weapons to be carried and not restricting other areas? Why wouldn't it be either or? We're either going to restrict them completely off campus, or we're going to allow them completely on campus.
Mhm.
That's the question. Why?
Well, it was thought that this was probably the most prudent action because we do have over 21. These are people that are good Georgians. They've been fingerprinted. They've been background checked. They are meant to carry concealed so that it doesn't become a distraction to the educational process there on university campuses. It became an issue. Securing the weapon on university housing was an issue. What if the student leaves their weapon in there? If they go to the shower, they're obviously not going to be able to carry their weapon with them there. So that became an issue. So we felt like this was the most prudent course of action.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
But wouldn't you agree that if you believe in gun rights, then there should be no restrictions? And if there are restrictions, then why aren't we restricting other areas? Why is it not favorable to restrict other areas? I mean, you either believe in gun rights or you don't.
Obviously, I do.
Okay, so why the restrictions?
Why are the restrictions? Because we do believe in prudent gun rights. And we
agree.
believe them.
I agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I might just answer part of that also, the reason that a lot of these bills were put in. Georgia, we have gone a long way of changing the Second Amendment statutes in Georgia. Quite frankly, a lot of this is based on the ability to pass it. It takes 91 votes in the House, takes 29 votes in the Senate. And, you know, it's the legislative process, you know, it's a process, not an event. And last year, and as I look at the bill, I remember very well last year in the campus carry bill of last year, the reason a lot of those exemptions were put in was quite frankly to appease members of the legislature to get their votes. So, you know, some people didn't see the wisdom of carrying a weapon in an athletic event, so that was taken out. At some point, hopefully we'll see the day that we can have true Second Amendment rights. Let's see, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair Lady, Chairwoman. I know we had some concerns about cost. People, they bring up the added cost to universities. If you could address that, because in my thinking, if it was about protecting and keeping guns off campus, wouldn't those measures be in place currently if it was about keeping the guns off campus right now? And so it just kind of puzzles me about why, if you allow the guns, now you have to blockade the campus and see who has the right to carry the gun on campus where it's not being done right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a lot of people think that, you know, because there were buildings that are on and off, and so I know in Texas there was quite a cost that was associated with the campus carry that they passed there because there were certain buildings that were prohibited, so they had to provide lock boxes and that sort of thing for those firearms. So this is not contemplated here in this particular piece of legislation.
Okay.
So there would be no cost.
Thank you.
Ms. Frazier, again?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. Madam Chairwoman, can you explain to me why chapels are not included in this legislation? A couple of years ago, we passed a bill allowing churches and chapels to make that distinction on whether they wanted guns. So is this now up to the chaplain on the college campuses to either put a sign out saying guns are not permitted in the chapel, or is this just a place where they can carry the guns?
That would be allowed under this particular piece of legislation. It was really in the prior legislation that you're referencing. It really boils down to private property rights. We firmly believe that people who, own private property have the right to determine whether or not somebody is going to be carrying a weapon on or off their property. So that would fall under that church. The property is obviously owned by the church, so the church would make that determination.
So they actually can put a sign up saying no weapons permitted.
Churches can, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, one last question. And where's the security in this? Suppose a person comes on and actually goes into a dormitory and oops, forget they have their gun on them. So what happens with this
What's
situation?
to prevent that now?
And
What security is there now? There
what
isn't.
security do you have in your legislation is what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
That would take care of that. Who would confiscate the weapon? And is there any penalty or liability for this?
It would be handled the same way it is now.
Which is?
Somebody would be able to contact campus police, and campus police would show up and charge as appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Waits.
Chairwoman Ballinger, I do want to express my appreciation because I do believe that your goal is to solve a problem, so thank you for that. My question is this: is it not true that the higher ed community weighed in on this conversation specific to administrators as well as the law enforcement community, and they indicated they did not support this measure given that they are the experts? Is that not true?
I know that the higher ed community had some concerns, but the law enforcement community in and of itself is generally speaking appreciative of Second Amendment expansion.
Okay. Follow-up question, sir.
Sure.
And finally, would you be open to some type of friendly amendment? Because right now, we don't have any safety requirements regarding the concealed carry permit. So in Georgia, if you go and get one, you are not required to know how to load, shoot it, arm it, or anything. You're able to just get a fingerprint, pass a background check, and you're given a concealed weapons carry permit in the state of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is this: would you be open to some type of friendly amendment, given that we're going to give weapons to young people on college campuses, so they would at least have some type of knowledge base if they decided to carry at these institutions?
That wouldn't be considered a Second Amendment. That would not be considered a friendly amendment. I do apologize for that. I don't believe that anybody should have to take a class to be able to exercise their rights. We don't require on college campuses a journalism class to be able to, exercise free speech on college campus.
Thank you.
Very well. Any other questions from the committee members?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the committee hold off on passing a vote on this bill. There are a couple of slight modifications or perhaps discussions that I'm still having with other concerned parties on this bill. So I would ask that I know several people are friendly to the bill, but I would ask that there be no motion made on this bill at this time.
But we will be acting on this bill soon.
Yes, soon. I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chairman, and I do apologize for
My
that.
thanks and compliments to the author of this bill.
Okay.
And
Thank you,
we're-
Mr. Chairman. If there's nothing else, thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee.
We have a sign-up sheet, and as is customary for this committee, we're sort of old-fashioned. We believe everybody has a right to be heard. On most of the Second Amendment bills in front of you, they were heard in the subcommittee on Thursday and Friday, thanks to the diligence of Subcommittee Chairman Clark. And some of you may have been heard, but we have a sign-up sheet today, and we're going to go through this list. And if I might ask you to sort of limit your comments, just get to the point. I think we all know what the issues are, and we think pretty sure this committee's heard them before. But I certainly do want everybody to know that they have a right to be heard. So that being said, Mr. Wiskind, did I pronounce that your name right? And if I didn't, I apologize.
It's Wiskin.
Wiskin.
A copy of my remarks to be passed around. I'm Bob Wiskin. I'm a general pediatrician and I practiced in Atlanta for 25 years. I'm a past president of the Georgia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I'm speaking on behalf of over 1,800 pediatricians across the state, general pediatricians, pediatric specialists, including pediatric emergency medicine physicians, pediatric surgeons, and adolescent medicine specialists. I'm here today to register the strong concerns of the Georgia AAP about this bill. Children in the United States currently pay a heavy price due to gun violence, with more than 17,000 shot every year and 2,600 dying. Over 900 children and teens use guns to commit suicide annually, while over 100 die in gun accidents. In Georgia, around 75 children die each year due to guns. Research shows that brain maturation does not occur until the mid-20s, meaning that adolescents and young adults in college are impulsive and prone to extremes. Adding the normal stresses of college life, including alcohol, creates the potential for volatile reactions. When guns are present, confrontations can quickly escalate to dangerous levels. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in adolescents and young adults between 15 and 34. 2/3 of suicide attempts are by firearms, of which 90% are fatal. In contrast, suicide by means other than firearms are far less lethal. Ready access to a firearm can often be the tipping point for young people considering suicide. For these reasons, we should be discouraging firearm possession on our college campuses, not encouraging it by expanding concealed carry. An additional concern is that the bill does not carve out gun-free zones for university hospitals and other campus healthcare settings. We believe bringing firearms into spaces that are intended to promote health and healing is grossly inappropriate and places physicians, patients, and families at risk of violence or unintended injury. Physicians working in publicly funded university clinics should be able to prohibit weapon carrying in their offices in the same way that their colleagues in private practice can. Further, the presence of weapons in these hospitals or clinics negatively impacts the sense of safety and security for the children and adolescents treated there. In vetoing campus carry legislation last year, Governor Deal concluded by writing, "From the early day of our nation and state, colleges have been treated as sanctuaries of learning where firearms have not been allowed. To depart from such time-honored protection should require overwhelming justification." That justification did not exist in 2016, and it does not exist today. HB 280 would be unsound public policy for our state and would put college students at increased risk. More guns on college campuses will result in more homicides, more suicides, and more accidental injuries and deaths. We therefore respectfully urge you to reject HB 280 and maintain reasonable safety standards on our college campuses. Thank you.
Any questions from any committee members? Thank you for taking time to come up. Carlos Marino.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Carlos Moreno. I'm associate professor at Emory University. I've been a professor there for 15 years. I'm also the parent of an undergraduate at Georgia Tech. So even though Emory is not directly affected by this legislation, I personally am, and my son would be. HB 280 will needlessly endanger students, faculty, and staff on the campuses of Georgia's universities and college. I've personally known students about whom I was seriously concerned as to whether they might do harm to themselves or to others. The last thing we need to do is to make it easier for these students to carry lethal weapons on campus. It is plainly evident that mental health concerns are all too common for today's college students. The mixture of stress, hormones, alcohol, and firearms that this bill would enable is a recipe for tragedy. Several of the deadliest mass shootings in the U.S. have taken place in the past few years on college campuses and been perpetrated by students. At Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia in 2007, 32 were killed and 17 were injured, second only to the Orlando massacre in mass shooting fatalities. At UC Santa Barbara in 2014, a student killed 6 and wounded 7. I would like to know how you will face the grieving parents of Georgia students after a tragic shooting or suicide is committed on one of Georgia's colleges and your universities. Moreover, Georgia voters are overwhelmingly against this bill. A 2014 AJC poll found that only 20% of Georgians support campus carry and 71% of Republican voters oppose this legislation. Additionally, this bill is an unfunded mandate because it excludes firearms from sporting events, dorms, and fraternities, but does not provide any funding for universities to provide safe storage of firearms. Proponents claim that this bill would help protect law-abiding citizens on college campuses, but this is a complete fallacy. If students have nowhere to store guns, they will end up in their vehicles, and this will be the quickest way for stolen guns to end up in the hands of criminals. Both the AJC and WABE have recently reported an alarming rise in the number of guns stolen from vehicles, with the number running over 800 a few months ago. Thus, this law will not make Georgians safer, it will make them less safe. In his veto statement last year, Governor Deal said, "From the early days of our nation and state, colleges have been treated as sanctuaries of learning where firearms have not been allowed. To depart from such time-honored protections should require overwhelming justification. If the intent of campus carry is to increase safety of our students on college campuses, it is highly questionable that such would be the result," end quote. It is time for you to stand up to the narrow special interests of the extreme gun lobby and reject this campus carry bill. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions? All right, number 16.
Yes. Cancer biology and bioinformatics. I also received a response to this, what I just read, which was an opinion piece in the AJC a couple days ago, came from Dr. Matthew Brody at the University of North Georgia, where he said 70% of undergraduates and graduate students at Georgia Tech are against this bill. Thank you.
Any other questions? I might make a comment at this point. I understood what you said about, and it's certainly something to grieve about when there's been a killing. But you know, gun-free zones, to a lot of us, that's almost like shooting ducks over a baited pond. So if you're saying it's a gun-free zone, who's there to protect them when an active shooter may come on board?
Well, that's the job of law enforcement.
Oh, thank you so much. You know what the rate of instances are at Georgia Tech campus?
I am aware of them, yes, but there have not been fatal shootings recently at Georgia Tech. I fully expect that there more likely will be shootings committed by students or other people on campus. It's more likely to happen if this legislation is passed.
You have another question?
More in the way of a comment, but as a retired police officer of 30 years, I can tell you that a police officer is seldom present when a crime is committed. If a police officer is present, the crime usually is not committed. More often than not, the police officer comes to investigate after the fact. The police officer is seldom there to prevent the crime when one is intent on doing harm.
Yeah, but response times to active shooting events are minutes, very few minutes.
And many people can be killed in a very few seconds. So again, I say, police activity is not going to have the absolute ability to prevent crimes on campus.
And arming the people there is not going to stop them either.
I disagree.
Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You had mentioned that, could you give me the Virginia Tech stats one more time, please?
Certainly. It was 32 killed and 17 injured.
Virginia Tech, is it a campus carry? Do they allow campus carry on Virginia Tech campus?
I couldn't say. I'm not aware of their laws there.
I guess that was going to be my question, or if it was a gun-free zone.
I couldn't tell you.
So 32 killed and 17 injured.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the perpetrator lived in the dorm, correct?
I believe so.
Do you know how long it took the police to get on the scene and stop him before the 33rd student was killed?
That was one of the first mass shootings that it had from in recent times, and police policies. This was I think potentially even before Columbine. So the policies of rapid response and rushing in had not been implemented at that time, and they were instead very much in a cautious mode to wait and see, and that was tragic, obviously.
Absolutely.
I think responses are really very different now.
And then you cited another university,
University of California, Santa Barbara.
UC Santa Barbara. And how many were killed there?
6 killed, 7 wounded.
7 wounded. Do you know whether or not if that campus was a gun-free zone?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been mentioned a couple of times already by some people that have commented about alcohol, mixing guns and alcohol on campus. If I'm not mistaken, our campuses in Georgia are dry campuses. You're not allowed to have alcohol on campuses. So you're not mixing guns and alcohol when it's a dry. So, but my point being, if they're getting drunk on, if there is alcohol on the campus and it's against the law, wouldn't it stand to reason that there's guns on campuses now, even though it's against the law? And only those that aren't respecting the law are participating in these activities?
I would say that there's going to be an increase in the number of firearms on campus if this is passed. I don't think there'll be an increase in the amount of alcohol on campus. The amount of alcohol on campus it's always been there, and I expect it always will be.
And then you also brought up thefts in cars. I think that's part of the concern with this legislation is people are being forced to leave their guns in cars now and not carrying them with them to where they go. So, I mean, I don't...
When they go into their dorm or when they go into
Well,
a sporting event, what are they supposed to do with their gun? They leave it in their car.
For dorms, again, this is for people who are 21 or over. I know the USG has the university system has a presence here today. Maybe they can get some stats, but most students who are 21 years or older are not living on campus housing. They're living off campus already. And then also the issue of unfunded mandates. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, we fund the university system of Georgia. And so if there is any increased cost, it's going to be funded from the state. So there wouldn't be an unfunded mandate.
Well, I think that the support from the state for the university system has been dropping annually.
Dropping.
Dropping significantly. There have been cuts, substantial cuts to funding. In fact, that's why tuitions have gone up.
I think you would need to look at our budget. We have been increasing spending through bond packages and line items in our budget for the university system of Georgia. But that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
As a percentage, the support has gone down.
Ms. Waits.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the answer to this, but is it not true that currently any student over the age of 21 at the UGA campus is allowed and permitted to have alcohol in the dorm? Is that not true?
I have no idea. I come from the 60s. We had it regardless.
My second question is, given the suicide rate among young people and accidental injury, my thought process is, given the testimony here today, with 17,000 shot annually, that this is something that we really need to take serious in terms of giving weapons to young people. My thoughts. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I don't believe we have any more questions for you, sir. I'm sorry I spoke too quick. Number 23.
It's just not a question, but I think for the members of the committee and those in the audience, it looks as if Virginia Tech and you said UC Santa Barbara were both gun-free zones, Mr. Chairman.
Only thing that I can avow to is about breaking and entering into vehicles. That in my 20-some-odd years up here in the General Assembly, I've lost 2 firearms by my vehicle being broken into. But I can assure you I've never lost a vehicle when I was carrying it on my person. Next up, Martha Miller.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing us to speak. I spent over 30 years as a tenured professor at a public institution of higher learning, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. 7 of those years I was chair of a large academic department. I opposed the passage of HB 280. I hope you will listen carefully to my reasons, as I think they are important. Guns on campus increase the likelihood of deadly violence against students and employees. In addition, the fear generated by guns on campus would impede the educational process. Let me explain further. First of all, many college students, even those 21 or over, do not have the maturity to safely carry concealed guns on campus. According to the University of Rochester Medical School, the rational part of a teen's brain isn't fully developed and won't be until age 25 or so. Secondly, college is stressful for many students, and having a gun handy could increase the chance of suicide. These not yet fully mature young people are in transition, trying to define themselves socially, vocationally, and intellectually. Many are coping with their first separation from the support of family and friends at home. Their studies may bring them in contact with ideas that challenge their previous worldview. Many report loneliness and depression is common. National data on campus suicide and depression has found that over 49% reported feeling hopeless during the past year. And 1 in every 12 US college students makes a suicide plan. Some mental illnesses, in addition, often they first manifest themselves at around the age we're talking about, and that includes schizophrenia. Given the risk of irrational acts and suicide, to me it seems to be a rational conclusion that students should not have instant access to guns while on campus. My other main concern, besides physical violence, is that allowing guns on campus will contribute to the erosion of academic standards. If this sounds far-fetched, let me explain. Real education depends on challenging students and taking them to a higher level of competence and learning. Sometimes this means telling a student, I can't pass you. You copied your paper from the internet, and I found it there. Or, your paper is poorly written, too short, with no sources. I am giving you a D. Or, you need to stop disrupting the class with your cell phone use. In a world where students may have a sense of entitlement as customers and consumers of education, they often react to such statements with anger directed at the instructor. The potential for violent retribution may make teachers avoid using deserved penalties and corrections. The presence of guns may make faculty afraid to confront students who violate academic honesty or civil behavior in the classroom, or to give students who exhibit belligerence the bad grades they deserve. Why should they risk being shot by a distraught student by holding the line on standards? Class discussions, in addition, can sometimes touch on sensitive issues that are upsetting to students. But if understanding the world is our objective as educators, we must investigate questions honestly and openly. Adding guns to the mix may inhibit the intense and growth-producing discussions that are so necessary. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Any questions? Thank you, ma'am. Susan Rebecca White.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. And I have to admit, I learned about this quickly, and so I'm speaking from the heart. I don't have my remarks are from the heart less than from a script, but I'm gonna speak as best I can. I'm a writer and a novelist. I'm also a teacher. I've taught in middle schools, high schools, and college. I'm currently the Farrell Sams Distinguished Writer in Residency at Mercer University, teaching creative writing. I've also taught at Emory. I've taught at Hollins in Virginia, and I've taught at SCAD in Atlanta. From a gut perspective, guns don't belong in the classroom. But from a personal perspective, I've had, and I'm sorry, I'm nervous, I've never done this before. I've had several young women in the course of my time teaching confide in me about being in relationships where there's domestic violence. And you would think, oh, well, if they could be armed, that would help them. But the statistics show, and my own understanding of human psychology shows, it doesn't. The Susan B. Anthony Center for Domestic Violence, which is in Connecticut, says that in domestic violence relationships where there is a gun, the abused is 5 times more likely to be killed. I had a student who was in a long-term abusive relationship, and I imagine the not only potentially fatal damage, but the psychological damage of knowing her abuser could be in class with a concealed weapon, a way of flashing it to let her know. You could say she could too, but that's not what I've seen. That's not what I've seen from these young women in these situations. I wanted to speak to this, to my experience, and that's what I have to offer to urge a vote against this.
All right, any questions? Thank you so much for taking time to come.
Thank you.
Cole Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, for letting me speak. Last December 2016, I became the first student to graduate with 3 degrees simultaneously as an honors scholar from Kennesaw State University. Unfortunately, as I began to look for employment, I found out that I was going to need a graduate degree, specifically in accounting. And when I started to look around Georgia to look at the different options that I had, I found that Georgia State really met what I was looking for. Unfortunately, having been in Atlanta, having walked around here at night, I just don't feel safe. I mean, it's not, Georgia State's fault. It's not, the fault of the faculty or or saying that the school's not doing a good job. It's just the fact that, being 5 foot and, 110 pounds, I just didn't feel comfortable walking around Atlanta at that time. And I think this bill would really allow me to feel more comfortable going to a graduate school in the state of Georgia. I had actually considered going ahead and moving over to Texas in order to go to school there because they do allow campus carry. And if I may, I'm going to address some of the concerns that have been brought up real quick. When people talk about this could increase suicides, according to the University of Oregon, 90% of suicides are committed at home. So there's no real fundamental research that says definitively that this would increase suicides. People say, that a gun might go off by accident or this might, things occur. Over the 150 university college campuses that today allow concealed carry or carry in some form, there have only been 3 incidents, 2 of which were committed by faculty or staff, 1 by students. So the idea that it would be the students that would be an issue is frankly not true. It's been seen that, if anything, it's faculty that have had an issue. In the end, what I'd like to say is that if you came here to make a change for Georgia, if you came here for positive movement, for defend the Second Amendment, this is your opportunity to do that. And one last thing. People say that, there's a lot of polls out there that students don't want this. Well, I'm a student that wants it. And if you looked at the last election cycle, people were saying, oh, there's a 90% chance that Hillary Clinton is going to win the election. There's a 98.5% chance, according to the Huffington Post, that Hillary Clinton was going to win the election due to polls. And, of course, we all know who the President of the United States is. So thank you very much. I'll take any questions you guys have.
Well, I don't see any questions, but I sure do like you, young man. And I just hope that wherever you go to grad school, you're not going to be studying whatever it is over at Emory. Mr. Gravely.
So I think what we've heard is the mentality or the narrative is and I've heard it said several times, if we allow students to have access to guns on campus. I don't know I don't know where they would go and get them on campus. If we allow students to carry, what if there's a situation of, I hear a lot of situations in dorm rooms or around alcohol. Again, how old are you?
I am 25 years old.
25. So you would be eligible.
Yes, sir.
A lot of the scenarios I'm hearing are 18, 19, 20. That if these students are carrying guns on campus, they're doing it illegally now, and if this bill passes, they would be doing it illegally then.
Correct, yes, sir. The only exception to that, as I understand, would be military personnel can obtain a concealed carry permit at the age of 18. But of course, those individuals are, in service to our nation, and I fully support them having that right.
I do as well. But I also wanted, if I may, Mr. Chairman, continue.
Sure.
I listened to you here, a student, a pretty accomplished student from your testimony.
Thank you.
And the stats, the suicide stat, and I keep hearing, if we do this, then all these students are going to go out and get guns. When the truth of the matter is, those who would likely be carrying on campus already have a gun. They just leave it at home, or it's in their car. I don't think that, at least as a gun owner, and has friends who are gun owners and friends who are not gun owners, when we passed HB 60, the friends that were not gun owners that I have, or the colleagues that I have, did not go out and purchase firearms simply because House Bill 60 was passed. I don't foresee students, they've passed a campus carry bill, I'm going to go out and get a firearm. I don't see how that narrative factually plays out. Or I have access, I'm going to go to the college campus and I'm going to be able to access a firearm. Because I can't do it in the dorm. I can't do it in the sporting setting. I can't do it in a preschool setting. So these are students who probably already have a Georgia weapons carry license, and I hear a lot going and getting we don't have a concealed carry license here in Georgia. We have what's called a Georgia weapons carry license, which allows you to carry either concealed or open, correct?
Correct.
So I'm trying to, in my head, figure out if we pass this legislation, how there's going to be a mad rush to the gun stores or to the clerk of court or probate court to be able to sign up and get a license. Well, those kids have to be 21 to do that. And so as I'm hearing this, and there was a couple of statistics I wanted to pass, but to your point, and I'll wrap up here, I keep going back to 32 kids were killed, 17 injured. Where I went to college, and I went to college here in Georgia, that was an entire classroom. So an entire classroom, matter of fact, I think it was probably biology, students would have been affected that day, would have not been able to do anything. And as I understand, I remember the news reports. Matter of fact, I recorded some of them, and I've watched some documentaries on YouTube recording that. This individual just walked free across campus from place to place, enough to kill 32 students and to injure 17 students. Not one of those students was able to either return fire, which probably would have halted the perpetrator, because we also see statistics that say when return fire is engaged, it stops immediately. The human brain, even police officers will tell you, the human brain reacts differently when somebody's firing at you. So I commend your testimony. I hope you are able to go to finish your graduate work here in the state of Georgia. We'd love to have you.
Yes, and for one thing, for your note about athletic facilities and alcohol, Governor's Gun Club in Lithia Springs, I believe, has a bar inside the gun club, and there's never been such an incident. So.
Actually, I'd like to. That's in my neck of the woods, actually, and I go there often.
It's a great club.
It is a good club. And so those that won't get up and say they're serving alcohol and we can go and shoot, you actually have to sit down and
Correct.
watch a video. Every person who enters in, that you are then permitted to shoot. Once you enter into the restaurant bar area, you're not allowed to go back into the shooting area. So I just want to make that one point clear.
Thank you, Mr. Gravely. Ms. Waits?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to return to the young woman's testimony, where she specifically indicated her concern with allowing weapons on college campuses was that it would potentially aid perpetrators with respect to domestic violence.
Are you making a comment to me?
Well,
or
I'm
you
just simply
addressing-
responding to the student that is here, and I'm just reminding you of the testimony that was given earlier in terms of her concern with respect to domestic violence, that if these potential perpetrators have access to a weapon, that it may increase the likelihood of domestic violence against young women. And I'm sure as a fellow student, you would be concerned about that.
I acknowledge your concern, and I agree that we need to stop domestic violence on campus as quickly as possible. And personally, as a gun owner, as someone who has a permit, I believe that one way to do that would be to arm those students that do feel in danger. That's just my personal belief.
Thank you.
If I'm not incorrect, I think that the largest growing population of gun purchasers and weapons licenses and people going to training are females
I believe so, yes, sir.
for that very reason. So much for domestic violence. Mr. Jeffries?
Jeffries.
I mean Jaspers. I have to apologize. You're not a senator. You still work for the people.
Here, here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't catch your name, but I'm sorry, but you're just a great example of the young people we have in higher education in Georgia, and we have confidence in you. And I think that's one thing that I've been involved in this issue for many years, is that we do have confidence in Georgians like yourself who are responsible. And I think if Chairman Ballinger was here, she'd say that you choose not to be a victim. And that's what I appreciate you. And Georgia State's a great place to go.
Thank you very much.
There's some of them sitting here that probably want to talk to you.
All right. And we have one more comment, Ms. Waits.
With respect to Representative Gravely's comment, when I introduced a piece of legislation that would have required concealed weapons carry safety training, I just wanted to remind the representative that the applications for those carry permits in the 5 metro counties, they doubled and tripled, specifically in Cobb County. So with respect to the comment that your concern is that people may not rush to obtain weapons, we have live examples in 2016, 2015, where individuals did actually go out and make applications. So that, to address that.
All right. Do I need to step in before we start having a spat here?
She's a friend.
Right ahead.
And we sit together on the House floor, so we have a lot of very good conversations. What was the age group, though, of those individuals that went?
You must be 21 to obtain that carry permit that you're referencing.
Exactly. But we didn't have 18, 19, and 21-year-olds, correct?
That is correct.
Would it be safe to say that 18, 19, or I'll go as far as say 17, 18, 19, and 20 make up the majority of college students in the state of Georgia?
I couldn't speak to that.
Okay.
All right. Cole, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
And since everybody in here seems to have my cell phone number and Mr. Clark's, I'd like to have yours. You're quite impressive, but not in front of everybody. Peggy Schiller, or Peg Schiller.
Hello, thank you for hearing me. I'm here on behalf of Outcry. Outcry is a faith-based organization that came together after the Newtown shootings. Over 320 clergy from across the state of Georgia, representing churches, temples, and mosques, came together after the Newtown shooting to discuss the moral crisis we have as a result of gun violence in the state of Georgia. Since then, They have worked on educating and discussing and praying over the crisis we have because of the many deaths due to gun violence. We're here quite simply to ask this committee to consider what our Governor Deal asked of you in his veto last year, and to veto this HB 280 now. I'm citing Justice Antonin Scalia's opinion in the District of Columbia versus Heller. Justice Deal really concentrated on the fact that schools have always had, historically both in Georgia and in the United States, a special status and a place where they should be free from guns and arms. Scalia specifically in Heller stated that the opinion that they wrote established that, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. The right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. Scalia admonished people that nothing in that opinion should be taken to cast doubt on laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places, such as, and I underline, such as schools and government buildings. This is what our governor underlined, that schools were sensitive places. Justice Scalia, our late Justice Scalia, also underlined that. Schools were sensitive places where the Second Amendment did not intend guns and arms to be. Governor Deal then went on in his veto to look at the founders of our nation, our founding fathers. He looked at Thomas Jefferson and James Madison on October 4th, 1824, when at a Board of Visitors meeting for the soon-to-be founded University of Virginia, when they were discussing the rules for student conduct. When they set forth those rules that day, they stated specifically that no student at the University of Virginia would, among other things, be allowed to keep or use weapons or arms of any kind on campus. The reason Jefferson and Madison did this, again, was because a university was a sensitive area, because it was a place of learning and separate from the rest of our nation. Governor Deal continued to say that the approval of this prohibition relating to campus carry by the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and the principal author of the United States Constitution should not only dispel any vestige of constitutional privilege, but should illustrate that having college campuses free of weapons has great historical precedent. What the people of faith all over our state are saying is, please listen to the governor. Take his suggestion that he made in his veto last year and consider making stronger penalties for people that do bring illegal weapons on campus. Make it harder for people to bring weapons on campus. Preserve the special status that our places of higher learning have, rather than allowing more people to bring those very weapons on campus, contrary to what our great thinkers since our founding have wanted. Thank you very much.
If you'll hold on, I think you have a question.
Oh, absolutely. Sorry.
Thank you, ma'am. It's right here. Just two things. The lady who was a teacher for North Carolina a minute ago, I was one of those hopeless students that she described in physics at the University of Georgia at one time, back in 1970.
I never was stupid enough to try and take physics, so.
I made it through, but it was after a lot of stress. But at that point at the University of Georgia in 1975, I had a shotgun in my truck. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't a prohibited thing.
You know, sir, I was not here in Georgia. I don't know what the state
Well, I'm
of the
just,
law
okay,
was.
then it wasn't prohibited.
Mhm.
And, I was under a tremendous amount of stress. And just like the young man that I talked about a moment ago, I guess we have confidence in the young people of Georgia. I didn't do anything, didn't cross the first shred of my mind to do something like that. And I think that's where some of your statements aren't based in fact.
I was quoting Governor
Well, you're
Deal,
saying
sir.
that these were prohibited spaces, and they weren't.
I said that Governor Deal has commented that historically we have said that the universities were special places, that Jefferson and Madison created universities as special places. That is what I said, sir. However, since you brought up a personal story, I will also bring up a personal story. I'm mother of a junior in college and a junior in high school. My son, who I love very dearly and who's brilliant in my mind, of course, he had some problems when he left for college the first time. He went to New Orleans, to Tulane, and his major was not anything academic. It was, shall we say, beer and eventually drugs. My son we had to go pick him up during his freshman year in college and bring him home. He started at Georgia State, things escalated, and unfortunately he had some very poor times. Now, he ended up in a drug stupor, is the only way I can describe it. I'm not proud of it. In fact, it was a tragic point in my life. But it was a wonderful turning point for him. He ended up in a drug stupor where he proceeded to try and attack two 250-pound sheriff's deputies. Now, my son, like this young man, is about 5'4" and weighs probably 130 pounds. So when he tried to attack those sheriff's deputies, you can imagine what happened. He was promptly put in handcuffs and was made a guest of the state for the night, which turned out to be a wonderful turning point because for my son, he realized that things had gone too far and we were able to get him into rehab. And I'm proud to say that he's a little bit too old to be a junior, but now he has a straight 4.0 at Oglethorpe and is applying to Ivy League schools for grad students and has been sober for 3 years. So the story was very happy. But having witnessed his attack on these sheriff's deputies, he was out of his mind. He had absolutely no control because of whatever drug it was he took. And I shudder to think he thought it was okay to attack a sheriff's deputy. My son, who I'd raised, was calling them names and thought it was okay to kick them. Now, he had some legal problems to deal with, and he did, but if he had had access to a weapon, we might not have the happy story in our family we have now, which is a son who had to do community service, who had some legal problems, who had to write long letters of apology to some sheriff's deputies, who had a long road ahead, but he was able to do that and is still alive today, and so are the sheriff's deputies, thankfully. Young people at that age get involved with things they shouldn't, and that's my personal story. You didn't do anything stupid, but my son, and I'm here to admit it publicly, did. And that's why I'm grateful that he didn't have a shotgun or any access to any gun, because he was at a point in his life where he couldn't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Power of prayer is a remarkable thing.
It is.
Caroline McGee.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I am an Episcopal priest, so I agree the power of prayer is a remarkable thing. I'm also here as a member of Outcry, and we support prudence in our gun legislation. Just like Ms. Ballinger said, that's a word I really appreciate, prudent gun laws. I'm also a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. I graduated in 1995. I served in 2 U.S. Navy warships and deployed twice. I first learned to handle weapons from the U.S. Marines, and I was taught to take them incredibly seriously. I have never forgotten the first time I ever picked up a gun, and I was casual with it because I hadn't before, and they grabbed my arms and got positive control of the weapon immediately. I never forgot that feeling and the feeling of the power of those weapons. We take them seriously because they're designed to kill. I also had to requalify regularly if I was going to use them. I rarely carried on a ship except in certain ports. We had to do it if we were officer of the deck in port. Certain ports you had to requalify every time because that's what makes you safe to handle a weapon. My understanding is that is different from the permit requirements here in the state of Georgia. I do not carry today because I'm not a good enough shot today, but I know for sure that achieving the age of 21 does not make you competent at carrying and using and safing a weapon. Things I'm concerned about, I should say I'm opposed to HB 280, not because I don't know anything about guns, but because I do know something about guns. The parts I'm concerned about here are primarily student health and mental health, and also cost to the state. While I hear that the legislation does not contemplate cost to the state, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any. Student mental health, we've already heard lots of this, But there are so many recent reports showing that the pressure on student mental health and counseling centers is overwhelming. It's on a precipitous rise. That's true nationwide, and that is true in the state of Georgia. 2015 American Freshman Survey looked at students at 227 schools, found emotional health of incoming freshmen is at its lowest point in 3 decades, and that doesn't necessarily improve by the age of 21 over the course of their education. Why do we care about this? Because students under mental health pressures are more reactive. That makes you more likely to perceive danger where there isn't any and react to it. And it makes you more likely to act out. One of the ways is suicide, which we have heard about. It's been proven over and over that access to means, including guns, makes it easier to commit suicide, increases the suicide rates. Other places maybe people would act out in this are what other folks have expressed concerns about in a private meeting with a faculty member. Maybe it's your first exposure to students of different race, different religions, different ideas, and if you're already experiencing tremendous pressure and you have a distorted ability to manage that reality, maybe if you have access to weapons, that makes you more likely to use them. That's something that we worry about. Colleges and universities are allowed to be carved out as a place where we don't carry weapons because they're sensitive places. They can be designated as such. And I think it's true right now that our students are sensitive, not categorically, not across the board, not necessarily the people you know or this young man here, but some are. And it's enough that counseling centers are being overwhelmed. And I'm sure they would be happy to talk with you about that. It's something we have to take seriously. Even the 21-year-olds, just becoming 21, the age of 21 doesn't necessarily make you more able to manage the stress that you're under if you're coming at it from a stressful place. I'd like to invite us to not use our own selves and our own experience in the years we went to college as examples. Times are what they are right now, and we have data that describes how students are right now. We cannot point to ourselves and our peers as the support for why this legislation is a good idea. We need to look at the body of students as it is now and their mental health and stability as it is now. My other concern is to do with cost, and this is partly because I was a lawyer before I was a priest. I practiced law at King and Spalding, and I think about what things end up costing even when you don't anticipate it, particularly through lawsuits. The Chronicle of Higher Education ran an article which I commend to you. It's called An Epidemic of Anguish. Overwhelmed by demand for mental health care, colleges face conflicts in choosing how to respond. An interesting part of this article is that universities are sometimes being sued now if their students act out in violence, particularly against themselves, but we haven't seen this play out in a campus carry environment. We don't know what that might entail. There is legal precedent that colleges may have what's called a special relationship with students, and that creates a duty of care. And I wonder if HB 280 properly considers the duty of care we might have to these students if we are permitting weapons carrying in this manner. I also worry about the students themselves. Maybe a 21-year-old carrier makes a bad decision, and then they and their family are suddenly open to lawsuits. I wonder about this, and I think there will be unexpected costs here. I believe everybody here truly is committed to the safety of our students. I really do. So it seems we would focus some of our attention on measures that will protect all of the students, not just 21-year-olds. And even when they're at sporting events or leaving the sporting events or in their dorms or in fraternity and sorority houses, if we're really worried about rape, of course we're worried about what goes on in fraternity and sorority houses, aren't we? But my understanding is the bill doesn't reach these spaces. A fortunate piece is that there is no evidence that students with guns will reduce campus crime. If you want that report, I can get it to you. It was produced by the Association of Florida Colleges. There is evidence of cost in that when Texas passed this, they lost faculty immediately as a result of this bill. There is cost there, especially as we have outstanding universities. People come from other states to come here, and we don't want to have opportunity costs lost by losing excellent faculty or students because of this bill. The state also may have to spend more on security and not less because of this bill. This is Texas experience. I am a person of faith, but I am not a person of fantasy. And I think it is a fantasy that randomly armed 21-year-olds will keep all of our students safe. And who's going to defend the freshman classes where there aren't any 21-year-olds? There was a Dallas sniper attack. You know, the police officers who were killed. It killed 5 cops, and they were armed. I think it is just a fallacy to encourage us all to believe that arming a few 21-year-olds is going to keep all the student body safe. I guess in closing, I'll say you've heard tons of facts. A lot of what I've already said has already been said. We've heard about domestic violence. We've heard about student mental health. We've heard about accidental deaths. We've heard about suicides. How can I help you to take this seriously? How can I help you? What can I give to you? I'll give you my cell phone number so that you have the information you need to consider all of these factors and think through why colleges and universities might be considered different and are generally considered different for Second Amendment purposes. That's all I got.
Cool. Any questions? Thank you for taking time to come.
Thanks for having me. I really will give you my number if you want it. I'd love to talk. And I always. Both things? Okay.
And as a priest, I wouldn't advertise my cell number around this town.
Noted. Thank you, sir.
See. Seven Hines.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dr. Sivan Hines. I was born in Philadelphia and obtained my undergraduate and medical degrees from Brown University. I served proudly in the United States Army for 11 years. I am currently a pediatrician in Cobb County, where I've practiced for over 16 years, taking care of thousands of patients from birth to age 21. It is in that role as a pediatrician that I've taken off from my practice today to be here to advocate for the safety of my patients and all Georgians by vehemently opposing House Bill 280. Medicine is a fact-based profession, and so I'd like to share with you some facts regarding campus carry. There is absolutely no credible evidence that allowing concealed carry will make college campuses safer. To quote a 2016 report from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, proposals to allow guns on college campuses must consider the fact that suicide attempts and serious assaults are far more common than are rampant shooting incidents. Inserting more firearms into those assaults and suicide attempts by allowing more people to have firearms on campuses is only likely to lead to more injuries and deaths. A recent study of 85 incidents of shootings and gun accidents on U.S. college campuses that occurred between January 2013 through June 2016 found that only 2 of those 85 incidents, 2.4%, involved a shooter on a rampage. Instead, the most common incidents were personal arguments that escalated into gun violence, suicides, and accidental shootings. My greatest concern with campus carry has to deal with suicides. In 2015, there were over 1,200 suicides in Georgia, and the rate in teenagers is increasing. This very Georgia Assembly recognized that critical issue in May of 2015 by passing House Bill 168, requiring mandatory suicide prevention training for all certified educators. The key word here is prevention, and access to a firearm has been well documented as the largest risk factor in successful suicide attempts. The American Academy of Pediatrics, in its 2012 policy statement, says the presence of guns in the homes increases the risk of lethal suicide acts among adolescents. Health professionals should counsel the parents of all adolescents to remove guns from the home. College campuses are our young people's homes, and House Bill 280 would clearly increase, not decrease, their firearm access. Here are a few more facts. 85 to 90% of suicide attempts involving a gun are successful, where only 2 to 6% of ingestions are. Research has shown that most teens do not even spend a long time planning to kill themselves. They often plan it in less than an hour, and often after an event that produces feelings of temporary failure or loss, such as getting in trouble, having an argument, breaking up with a partner, or even receiving a bad grade. Many of you are parents and grandparents, and we have all been young people at one time in our lives. When you are young, the brain is clearly less mature, and events can easily seem like they are life-altering. If young people attempt suicide during a moment of despair, we have a great chance of saving them with most methods except firearms. 85 to 90% of suicide attempts involving a gun are successful. Unfortunately, firearms don't allow health professions to give most people a second chance. The other added concern is access to alcohol. Binge drinking has been shown to be associated with a 4 times greater risk of suicide. Alcohol and firearms are a deadly combination, and I don't think any of us are truly naive about the amount of alcohol on college campuses. This panel is also already well aware that the vast majority of public and private college presidents throughout Georgia oppose campus carry. They are the experts on the needs of their campuses. I am not, and I don't believe that you are either. The facts are straightforward. Campus carry will put many of our young people at risk. As a pediatrician, I took an oath to put the health and safety of my patients first, and as state legislatures, you took an oath to protect and serve Georgians. I deeply hope you will follow that oath and not put forward House Bill 280. All of Georgia's citizens will be watching. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? None. Thank you, ma'am. Next up, and if I might ask, could we trim these down, these comments? Because if not, we're going to be here well past the meeting hour. And I'd like for everybody to have a chance to be heard that's signed up. David Bucky? Busey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm a retired attorney. I practiced law for 32 years. I'm the father of 3 children, and I've seen all my children have difficulties growing up, but that's the way it is when you're growing up. It's a turbulent time of life, and I agree with the others who believe that young people of college age are not fully mature and are going through difficult times in their lives, are learning a lot of new things. A lot of times you have to learn new things the hard way. I think that makes college students turbulent and a little bit volatile, and I think it makes campuses volatile, and I think that's why, as others have said, there's a lot to be said for designating our college campuses as sanctuaries. I think that the opinion of the individuals that you pay, that the state pays to be experts on college students, is very important. I think the fact that the university system chancellor and the university presidents have come out very strongly, if not unanimously, against this bill is extremely important. I think it would be a mistake for the legislature to ignore the opinion of the experts in this area, and I think it would put our young people, our college professors, and our college workers at great risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Busey. Any questions? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Dwayne Truex, and although I am a faculty member at Georgia State University and have been since 1994, I'm here as a public citizen, as a father, and as a father of a college student in Georgia. I have had over 30 years' experience in Georgia, other states in the United States, and 3 universities in Europe working with young people and engaged with them today, and do have a sense of what it is like to work with these people at a very difficult and challenging time. The political discourse, as you may know, has turned very vitriolic. And I must say that as a person in the classroom, one of the challenges that I have engaged in with students, particularly in teaching students of all faiths, of all nationalities, of all colors, is to engage them in passionate discourse at times. As a matter of fact, in some of my international business courses, one of the things that we pride is when people say, oh, you Pakistanis or you Americans too much, as they engage in spirited discourse. The classroom is a place where people should feel safe to engage in these discourse. Now, I'm here in opposition of this bill for 2 reasons. One is very pragmatic. I'm not opposing the Second Amendment. I am a gun owner for sport and public safety. In fact, I learned to use handguns at the hands of public safety officers when I was at Oklahoma State University. And I'm here to tell you that I believe, as a gun owner, that should I be in a classroom like Virginia Tech and violence breaks out, I do not believe that I, having a handgun, or someone else in the fog of such chaos would add in any way to the safety of those present. Indeed, should police officers arrive at the scene, anyone with a gun would be a challenge, suspect, and likely target. I think the pragmatics are such that we're looking at solving a problem that would not be solved, but one that would be created by the additional presence of handguns on campus. Now, do I think that allowing this bill would bring a plethora of additional guns? No, probably not. But the prohibitions in advance by parents and people knowing that guns are not welcome on campus does have an effect at limiting them. Members of the committee, I do not think we are solving a problem. I think we are creating a problem. Moreover, the exceptions that you have to the bill don't make a great deal of sense. The guns don't belong in the classroom, but do they belong at rock concerts? Clearly, we're not supposed to have alcohol and drugs on campus, but they exist at these venues. Does it make them safer there? Why exclude them only, for example, at athletic events? So I believe we have both a pragmatic issue. I don't think that allowing guns on campus make campus safer. And secondly, I think it does inhibit the free and open discourse that we would have. I know of doctoral students who have been in the classroom who have been challenged by people they have had to give failing grades to and have been threatened. I do believe the thought of having guns on campus will limit what we feel as faculty free to do. Now, colleagues have said, well, why don't you pack yourself? I can't imagine, by the way, in the state we have not conceal, but carry. And even with a concealed weapon, it is very difficult to carry a holstered .38 in any fashion or form that it is not apparent to someone. Imagine what that does to a student sitting in my classroom should I do something of this sort. I do not believe that the passage of this bill adds to either the safety or to academic discourse, and I urge that we do not vote this out of committee and that we do not pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Truex. Any questions? Thank you so much. Reynolds Couch.
My name is Reynolds Couch. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I'm a gun owner. I'm an avid devotee of the Second Amendment. I'm a hunter. I'm a grandfather of a young girl who is a sophomore in college. Today is her birthday. She's 20. Yesterday she was a teenager. She's not mature enough. She won't be in a year to handle a gun. I'm not opposed to anyone owning a gun, including her, but I am opposed to organizations and laws that encourage our children and grandchildren to become prepared to actually kill somebody. This bill that you're considering is cloaked in defense of self and others. And it sounds reasonable on its surface, because we would not want our children or grandchildren to be indefensible until we look more closely at a logical scenario. Ask yourself, how would a student carrying a gun in a classroom or in a library or a cafeteria logically defend himself, herself, or others? Well, he would draw, or she would draw, from their holster, partially concealed. It does not have to be totally concealed. I read the law, or the bill. It would be loaded. Otherwise, it would be useless. So the gun is loaded. It's a semi-automatic. Nobody's firing single-shot pistols. They're firing clip-fed, semi-automatic, lightweight, 9mm kinds of guns. And they would have to be prepared to actually kill with that gun. A gun is designed and manufactured to kill. It's not manufactured to wound, to maim, or to do anything, or to cripple. It's designed to kill. Now, if this student has any training at all, and he or she is not required to have any training, just fingerprinting and pass a law that, or pass, I guess, through the courts that you're not a felon. If he's had any training at all, it's probably been on a range. And that range has a target that's a silhouette of a torso and a head. And the proficiency and the success of that person is based on how many rounds they put into a kill zone. That kill zone is the heart or the head. Now, the sponsors of these bills never describe how these semi-automatic handguns are used in defense. They lean on the Second Amendment, which was adopted in 1791 to maintain a militia for a new country. At that time, patriots had single-shot muskets and ball-and-cap pistols. The automatic handgun wasn't invented until 100 years later. But that's the handgun of choice today. When I was in the Marine Corps, no one on any military base where I was stationed was allowed to walk around with a loaded weapon unless they were military police. And we never, ever gave out handguns for defense of self or others. We taught new recruits never to aim their weapon at another human being unless they were prepared to kill that person. That's the sole purpose of the weapon. Our grandchildren and our children have enough issues. You've heard them all through experts, both from the ministry and from the medical profession. They have enough issues dealing with alcohol and drugs in college. Let's not add loaded guns to their problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Couch. Do we have any questions? Yes, Elizabeth Appleby. Dear, did you fall asleep over there?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm here on behalf of Presbyterians for Better Georgia. We approach this issue from a perspective of faith, as many other speakers today have. We believe that it's critically important that Georgia adopt sane gun laws that will keep people safe and that will protect the sanctity of life. I'm not going to repeat what others have said. I can add to my credentials that I'm a lawyer practicing almost 40 years. I'm a mother of two wonderful young men who have graduated from college, and but I will quote the experts instead. And I'll refer again to Governor Deal's veto message, because Governor Deal specifically went through and rejected the arguments that were made in favor of passage of campus carry last year. He said that despite criminal conduct on campus, this does not justify such a, quote, radical departure from the classification of colleges as sensitive areas where weapons are not allowed. And the governor went on to say that since students under 21 cannot carry, a significant part of the student body would remain unarmed. He said, I quote, since most, if not all, of our colleges are open campuses, this bill will allow any licensed gun owner to bring a concealed weapon onto the campus, and neither police nor other law enforcement personnel will be allowed to even ask the individual to produce evidence of a license. So we don't have that protection. He went on to say that if the intent of last year's bill is to increase safety of students on college campuses, it is highly questionable that such would be the result. And the governor suggested instead increasing the penalty for unauthorized carry on campus instead of the proposed legislation. Finally, he said from the early days, and this has been quoted, to depart from the time-honored protections that we've afforded college campuses and act we should require overwhelming justification. In fact, the research shows that the majority of Georgians agree with Governor Deal in opposing this legislation, that the chancellor of the university system, the university presidents, campus officials charged with the security of students and faculty oppose this legislation, as do the majority of students and professors. There are no protections, as it has been said, against carrying a loaded weapon into a professor's office, a classroom, an administrative office, a financial aid office, a disciplinary hearing, or other sensitive and highly volatile locations on campus. The cost issue has been raised. It's been documented in Texas. It's been documented in Florida. The cost of these storage facilities, the cost of increased insurance, and the risk of litigation has been itemized. Members of the committee, the last speaker said more eloquently than I possibly could the risk that we put our students and our faculty under. They are not going to protect in an active shooter situation. We have read in recent years of active shooters who kill people on an army base in situations where many people are already armed. We live in dangerous times, but it's our obligation and your obligation as public officials to make sure that the legislation we pass, that you pass, keeps our children and our faculty safe and not increase at risk of harm. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Any questions?
Thank you.
Betty Lang? Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Betty Lang. I speak to you today not as a weapons expert or a politician or a physician, but as a former college student and a graduate school student, a mother, a grandmother of potential college students, and a teacher of many years. The college years should be a free time to learn and to learn how to express oneself, to open your mind to new ideas, and to try life on for size. Colleges should be made safe zones, made safe on their campuses by their security systems, so students can move and mingle freely. Young people this age are not known for always making the best choices. I have 2 children who were honor students at one of our flagship universities in the state. One child made some pretty foolish choices. Not atypical, but managed to graduate, thankfully. Phi Beta Kappa. Think of your college years. Chairman Ralston and I remember ours. So we don't always do what we ought to when we're in college. Who should make decisions about students and dangerous weapons? I believe the presidents and deans of the colleges and universities who are entrusted with their safety and know their needs better than others. I believe that tuition should go for education and not for insurance costs to protect colleges from liability suits. As has been said many times today, college presidents and the majority of Georgia's citizens do not favor campus carry. As a person of faith and a member of Outcry, Interfaith Voices Against Gun Violence, I believe life is sacred, and the best way to keep our children safe is to keep guns off campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions? Thank you so much. Glenn Combs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hold a PhD from the University of Texas in Austin, and I'm currently an enrolled law student at Georgia State University. I come today to speak in opposition to this bill. Most importantly, guns do, I think we should all acknowledge, make us feel safer, as long as we're the ones carrying them. But there's a statistical question about whether or not that feeling of safety is real safety, whether it's the perception of safety or the fact. And there's just a huge body of literature that speaks to this question. So men with regular access to guns who live in a space with regular access to guns are 29% likely to be killed than their peers without. Women are 3 times as likely to be killed by firearms as those who don't live in areas with regular access to guns. Both men and women with regular access to guns are 3 times as likely to commit suicide as their unarmed peers. Women who purchase guns are 50% more likely to be killed by their intimate partners than their unarmed peers. Contrary to popular belief, and this has been said a lot, I know it's dear to a lot of the members, this is not a Second Amendment issue. In our nation's history, we have one case that's gone before the Supreme Court that recognized a right, that is a private right, to gun possession under the Second Amendment. In that case, the District of Columbia versus Heller, what was recognized? Only a narrow right to possess a handgun in one's home for the purpose of self-defense. Right? This law explicitly leaves in place bans on guns in student residences, which are the closest analog that college students have, in many cases, to a home. And in his decision, as you've heard, the late Justice Scalia explicitly stated that the Second Amendment is fully consistent with existing bans at universities. So this bill, like other concealed carry laws, I think it's important to look at the statistics and the evidence, will probably not have much direct impact on crime. So contrary to the, no one thinks this is going to be a wild, or should think this is going to result in a Wild West frontier. But when you talk about laws, you talk about how well tailored those laws are to the purposes, the policy purposes that they aim to achieve. And you stated a few, for example, rape. Well, it'll definitely do nothing to help campus rape. So 90% of campus rape is between acquaintances, and the vast majority of that happens in residence halls. So this bill wisely doesn't go to residences. It's not going to do anything to stop rape there. Tragically, estimates are that 15% of college females are raped while incapacitated from alcohol or drugs in their freshman year. If anything, this bill faces the risk of possibly exposing them to greater danger. It won't likely help victims of armed robbery, virtually all of whom are singled out for surprise attacks. And I would direct you to read those campus alerts that come out at Georgia State about what happens. You have kids that are going to school, they're wearing their backpacks. Where do you think they're going to keep their guns? In their backpacks. What do you think gets stolen? Their backpacks. You have people who are studying in a library. Do you think they got their hand on the hilt? No, of course not. They're studying. They're busy about other business. So I don't see really how this is going to help. And most tragically, or most potentially tragically, in the event of an actor-shooter situation, just pause for a minute to consider the first responders. Right? So our brave men and women in blue put their lives on the line to protect and serve. But are you willing to bet that they're going to be able, in the heat of the moment, to separate the good student with a gun from the bad student with a gun? I urge this body to think deeply about these troubling implications before passing this law. And lastly, if none of this moves you, I've spent time in Texas. I've seen firsthand how this ban affects communities. So Texas recently passed a similar law. It went into effect rather morbidly 50 years to the day from the tower shooting that happened in Austin. It's been met with waves of student and administrative protests. Several professors, including a prominent dean at the elite School of Architecture, have resigned, citing campus carry as a motivation. Some professors have engaged in civil disobedience, refusing to teach in classrooms where arms were permitted. And just speaking from my own experience, a number of professors view this introduction of guns to what they view as a safe space as a moral calamity. And just one little thing to close on. I appreciate that we're all mindful of the dangers that are posed by these mass shooting incidents, but we need to be mindful of the real dangers of handguns, right? So active shooter situations in public spaces account for less than 0.1% of all handgun deaths in the US. So be mindful of the dangers, but also be mindful of the statistics. You're talking about introducing guns to some of the safest spaces in the United States, and every report out there will show you, without any kind of deviation, that the safe spaces at our universities are orders of magnitude safer than the general public already. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Thank you. Dr. Wrigley. So good to have you with us, Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee about this important issue, and I'll try to be brief. Chairman Powell and members of the committee, on behalf of the University System of Georgia, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about House Bill 280. The campus carry issue has been before you many times through the years. I know you all understand our position, and we understand yours as well. Campus safety is a top priority for us, and we appreciate that it is for you. Last summer, Governor Deal requested a campus safety report from the University System and Technical College System. Those reports were delivered to the governor, speaker, and lieutenant governor in August of 2016. The report provides an overview of our efforts to keep our campuses safe. Prior to this, we had a system-wide task force on campus safety, and since 2015, the university system has implemented more than 20 recommendations from that report. Here are a few of the steps that we have taken. We began with a comprehensive assessment of our police departments and have implemented system-wide police officer training programs focused on active shooter scenarios. We have developed mutual aid agreements with local law enforcement and established campus safety committees that meet regularly. We also made a commitment to adding more frontline officers at our campuses. This fiscal year, we are increasing the number of police officers system-wide by 6%. We now employ 818 full-time post-certified officers across the system. Our campus police forces are also investing in new technologies and devising new ways not only to catch criminals, but to prevent crimes from occurring. All of our institutions have mass communication alert systems and camera surveillance. Many schools are adopting new apps on their phones for campus-wide crime alerts. Georgia Tech has implemented an advanced crime analytics system, and Georgia State has increased the number of controlled access points to ensure only those permitted have access to certain areas. We know there is not a perfect solution to crime prevention, but these types of investments and efforts, coupled with the year-round training for our campus police forces, are critical to providing a safe environment to learn. With respect to campus carry, we feel strongly that current law strikes the right balance to create a safe environment on our campuses. This position is supported by our presidents and campus public safety departments. who are closest to the day-to-day realities and operations of the state's public colleges and universities. We therefore respectfully oppose any change to current law. In closing, I want to repeat that keeping our students, faculty, and staff safe is a top priority for all of us. We have made it clear to our presidents that funding of police positions should get the first claim on their budget dollars. We have made strides in training, planning, and monitoring, and will continue to do all we can to keep our campuses safe. You face many complex issues every year. I respect what you do, and we appreciate the support you show the university system every year. You are always willing to let us offer our point of view, and for that we are grateful. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Any questions? Hey, always good to see you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Same here.
Last but not least, Mr. Thomas Weaver.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I rise today in support of the proposal that's been proffered by your colleague and friend, Representative Ballinger, in regards to House Bill 280. I want to be incredibly succinct and concise. I know that you have received much testimony today, and I don't want to duplicate any of the testimony that's already been rendered. I would just submit to each of you that the Georgia Constitution, under the 8th paragraphical amendment, Article 1, Section 1, vests the Georgia General Assembly with the authority to regulate and prescribe the manner in which arms are to be borne. And this legislative proposal is keeping with the constitutional tenets to which each of you have been sworn to uphold. And with that, I would ask for your favorable consideration and due passage recommendation on this critically important public safety legislation. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Thomas. Any questions from anyone? We have some gentlemen went back here in the back that didn't get here in time to sign up, wanted to be, we want everybody to have their say. If you would identify yourself, please.
George Laws. Thank you for allowing me time to speak. Appreciate it. Just want to make a few quick comments. A lot of this has already been said, but the young fellow who spoke about the fact that he would feel safer walking through the downtown streets of Atlanta if he was armed. My brother-in-law carries a weapon. He was mugged several months ago. Wasn't even in Atlanta. And guess what? The bad guy's got a gun as well as his wallet. I mean, we all know for a fact that carrying a weapon doesn't necessarily make you any safer. More to the point, a documentary was just released about the tower shooting in Texas, which was tragic. It's been referenced here today. And law enforcement officials there stated for a fact that their response was slowed down by the fact that there were so many people firing weapons on that campus at that point in time. They didn't know who the good guys or bad guys were, and it really slowed down their response. So you get into a situation where people are shooting at everybody and the cops show up. I mean, who's to say who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? But to focus more on the point that's here today, I'd like to know if I could. I was speaking with an NRA official out in the hallway, representative. He said to me, we had a discussion. I said, do you believe every American should always be armed? He said, I absolutely do. And I'd like to see a show of hands from y'all up here. Who believes that every American should always be armed over 21 years of age? None of you? Is that right?
If I might, sir, we're here to take testimony. And,
all right, so let me move on to that next point then. What I believe is going on here today is that this is the agenda of the NRA. This is to promote the continued disbursement and distribution of weapons throughout this country, and it's based on a feeling of fear and divisiveness. We're meant to be afraid. We're told to be afraid because of the bad guys. Maybe they're Muslims, maybe they're terrorists, maybe they're going to be on our campuses shooting at our kids. If we live in this environment of fear, if we feel we all have to defend ourselves and be armed continuously, that is not a country I want to live in. I don't think it's a country any of us want to live in. There's no need for this legislation to pass. There's been shown that there's a lot of downsides to it. I think it's a cowardly bill. I think it is a cowardly bill, and it promotes fear and divisiveness, and I'm utterly opposed to it. Thank you.
Thank you for taking time to come up and speak. Do we have anyone that wishes to respond or to make a comment or a question of the gentleman? If not, is anyone else that has not had a chance to be heard? Even more important, is anybody out there that doesn't have my cell phone number so you can call me or send me another email? That's easy enough. Go by my office, because I'm certainly not afraid for it to be known. All right, at that point, we're going to move on to the next bill. The author has asked us to hold this bill, and I think that probably it, and I do want to thank some of the folks that had made some very pertinent comments about the governor's his rationale as to why it was vetoed last year, and I think those issues are being addressed. All right. All right, next up, Mr. Elam. $251. And I believe you're going to be working from a committee substitute.
Yes, sir. It is LC 401434. That's all we're going to do.
ERS. All right. Tell us about it.
Chairman of the committee, I appreciate your invitation with me to allow me to work out some kinks, and I believe we've done that. Very, oh God. All right, sorry. It really has become very simplified. In the very beginning, the concept here was for all personnel who were properly working during a period or a state of emergency under the control of the local governing authority would have the authorization to actually go on private property in the process of clearing and cleaning and taking care of the problems that's been caused by the emergency. As we have now redrafted it, we're actually only talking about one segment, and I will read from the bill. It says, Department of Corrections personnel and individuals in their custody and subject to their direction shall be authorized to enter upon private property to the extent necessary, etc. So really, that's all we're talking about, Mr. Chairman, members, is to allow folks that are with the Department of Justice to be allowed to work on private property as well as public property, sir.
All right. Questions from the committee members? Mr. Jaspers.
Thank you, Representative. Got a few questions on this. What was the problem that precipitated the need for this bill?
We actually had two situations. We had one in Miller County, and I personally had one myself, in which I had about 10 prisoners that were working with me, and their guard did not want to allow them to go on private property. And literally, we were working down a power line. You've got a power line that basically divides the private property and the public property. So we had trees, I think, I don't know if you bet earlier, but literally, if you can think of playing the game of pickup sticks, where you just got hundreds of like toothpicks crossing each other. That's what we had there, except these trees were larger than you could reach around, 100, 150 feet tall, and literally they just wrapping everywhere. Very, very difficult to clean on the public right-of-way without going to the public. And so this would just allow them, without fear of retribution, to go on to the public and the private and to clear during the emergency. And this is only during the emergency period, okay? And it's only under the control of the emergency personnel.
Well, I've got a question. I have been through 3 tornadoes in my community, and some devastating. I've worked with Department of Corrections many times. I've never had this problem. Never. And, I guess I'm a property rights guy, the very basis of why I'm here. And I just cannot get when I first saw this bill, and then I even see where you have changed it some, see the real purpose. And especially when I look at, and I've worked with prisoners, inmates on people's property with their law enforcement with shotguns on them. And this does not identify that they can't go in someone's house. It doesn't say that they can only work on right-of-way for a power right-of-way. It really opens up that they could go anywhere, search anything, do anything. And I just, as a committee member here, just have a problem putting it in code that they can do this. And I would just, that's just one of my problems with it. But I just still don't see why that y'all had this problem for one person going down a power line right away and not being able to clear. I just can't, I just have my arms around that one. And then just the other question, that's on line 13 and 14. And then you look at line 18 through 20, where it says a reasonable effort to avoid interfering with private property. Now, what does that mean?
A reasonable effort.
A reasonable effort.
Yes, sir.
We're dealing with law enforcement on people's private property. What does a reasonable effort mean?
I'm not an attorney.
Well, but you got a bill here that's
Yes.
that's going on people's
Yes.
private property.
Yes, yes.
And so if I'm a gentleman that says, no, show me your search warrant, is that an interference of the work that they're doing?
In my earlier draft, I actually had stated in it that if a private property owner objected, then they could not come on your property. And I would surely be willing to add back that language. I did not want it to be taken out. Because if you're, in the particular instance when I was working, it's actually, and I also had in my original bill volunteers that were helping. And it was in the middle of the night. It was black dark. And we were actually going through the Radium Springs area looking for elderly people that were trapped in their homes. They had no power. Everything it was black. It was absolutely black dark. And so we actually were having to go onto private property, house to house, and we found several elderly people there. They were actually trapped. Well,
excuse me, I don't think this is talking about that.
No, it's not. We have shifted away from that, and we're strictly, this bill is totally specifically talking about the Department of Correction personnel who are assisting with the recovery effort, allowing them in the process of doing that, if they go onto the private property in the process of doing the cleaning and clearing, then that would be acceptable.
Mr. Chairman, I guess on mind of this, if it were better defined that they were talking about right-of-ways and very defined areas, but I think, lines 18 through 20, reasonable effort. I mean, I know people that live where I'm from that would just want to say no. And under this, they would not be able to do that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I am very amenable to narrowing that down to where it's more specific and it's very clear.
I guess Mr. Chairman, I guess I've not been convinced that there's a reason for this, that we're stepping into people's private property rights when, we could certainly come look at a right-of-way only or, I guess you can see my passion for people's property rights
Absolutely.
being exhibited.
You can't be more passionate than I am. Thankfully, our family owns a considerable amount of property. From my perspective, I was directly involved in both of the storms. In fact, the storm on the 2nd of January and then again on the 22nd of January that came right through my district. One on the first one on the west side of the Flint River, the second one on the east side. Tremendous amount of damage within hours. The first storm had 2 trees on my oldest daughter's house. The second one did tremendous damage to my son's house and my daughter's house. The mobile home park where several people were killed actually is about, as a crow flies, about a half a mile from my house. I was there immediately on site helping people.
That's well and good.
Yes.
Representative, this bill doesn't address that. I spent 3 weeks burying 35 chicken houses.
Yes.
So, in similar situation, but I'm really going to defend Georgians' private property rights. And I think this bill undermines that. And I guess that's I could see you coming back with something that really defined where, if you're just talking about right-of-ways, that, yeah, I'm not speaking for the committee for sure, it's Rick, but,
Is there wording
very-
that you would accept?
not on the spot right here now, but
Okay.
I think there's something that, I mean, I listen to other committee members, I'm through.
Let's
Mr.
see if
Chairman.
we
Thank
can,
you.
we got a couple more questions. Let's
Okay.
see if anybody can add to this. Mr. Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the author, does current law prohibit a law enforcement officer, let's say, let's give a scenario, the storms down in your district.
Right.
It's an emergency situation, the governor has declared emergency situation, or a state of emergency for that region. And a law enforcement officer has a prison detail equipped with chainsaws, ropes, everything like that.
Right.
Has been charged by the sheriff to go out and help clear roads. Does current law prohibit them right now, as we stand, from
Yes.
going on the property?
It's not my understanding it prohibits it, but as I understand it, it does not allow them to. And so the guard personnel were not willing to take that liberty. This would not make it muddy. It would make it very, very clear that if they're there working under the auspice of the emergency personnel, strictly during the state of emergency. And you got to remember too that the governor, when he gave the state of emergencies for us, he only gave them 4, 5, 6, 7 days at a time. We're talking about a very, very short period of time. At the end of that, he extended them for another 4 or 5. So it's under a very, very short period of time and a very closed circumstances. Does that answer your question, sir?
I'm just trying to see if there's a distinct prohibition. I mean, and it doesn't allow them to do it, but if you're in a state of an emergency,
Right.
you've got trees, you have law enforcement officers. I'm trying to think, is there something already in place that this bill is trying to address in that particular scenario? I would also have, I would like a definition of reasonable effort, and I'm trying to, could you help me on the line there? I'm looking at LC 40-143 4 ERS. That's what we're on, correct, Mr. Chairman?
What number did you say?
Your bill 251, state of emergency disaster declared by the governor.
Your number?
LC 40-143 4 ERS. That's the one you're working off of?
1434. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Extent necessary. But the gentleman, Mr. Jaspers, said reasonable effort. I'm trying to. Thank you, sir. Shall make reasonable effort. We have some attorneys in the room, or some judges that may. What is a reasonable? I knocked on the door, or we tried to make a phone call, or we. I don't know. Shouted from the driveway, or. I'm just trying to say what is that reasonable effort?
Mr. Chairman, if there's an attorney, I'd be glad to.
We got some pretty good ones on this.
If I might, let me interject, privilege of the chair of this meeting. Since somehow you have managed to get more lights lit up here from committee members, I want to submit that we send this bill back to the subcommittee. And if you would work with Mr. Jaspers on some proper language, and if he's unavailable, if you would work with Mr. Gravely, because I think he's been well skilled in the Judiciary Committee, and y'all can come up with some acceptable language. Would that be permissible?
Yes, sir. I agree.
Any of these lights blinking, do y'all just have an unbearable desire to speak on this, or let it go back to the subcommittee?
I think it should go back to the subcommittee.
Ms. Frazier?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not unbearable, but I'd just like to ask Representative Elam a question. In the 2014 ice storm, I was actually, my community was devastated by that ice storm. And trees do not have a sense of direction when they're falling. So in my neighborhood, there were 150 feet, 200 feet trees that fell across the highway, and some fell upon property lines. So we had crews out there that were cleaning them, but they were cutting where the right-of-way was and across the highway. We didn't have anybody coming over into the property, taking that part of the tree away. Well, I know what you're trying to do here with the corrections personnel, being able to come over and also cut that part of the tree and remove it in a disastrous area. I understand what you're trying to do. And so what I end up having to do in my neighborhood was actually call Public Works and have them come out. And they did bring correction workers out, but they were not allowed on our property to do so. Had that been in place, we could have gotten a lot of those trees removed the same day.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative, and I think there's a meeting of the subcommittee tomorrow,
Okay.
and see if we can get all this worked out.
All right, sir.
This full committee will be meeting again this week.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll call up for discussion purposes, Ms. Ammons, if you'd come up. Somehow this is a bill that Department of Corrections has asked me to drop in on their behalf, and I'm going to, of course, I also see something needs to be amended right off the bat. But if you would, Ms. Ammons.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jennifer Ammons. I'm the General Counsel for the Georgia Department of Corrections. This is our agency bill for this year. It's very brief. It addresses a couple of problems that we have. Section 1 would make an amendment to a code section dealing with contraband being brought inside the guard lines of the prison. As you've probably heard in a number of media reports, contraband is probably our biggest issue at the Department of Corrections, and we work all day, every day, trying to keep the contraband out, much like we try to keep the offenders in. And this would help us in our efforts to keep tobacco out of the prisons. Section 2 deals with a problem that we struggle with very much, which is currency, not the kind of currency that you and I carry in our wallets, because prisoners are not allowed to have that, but it is a way in which the offenders exchange goods and services. They use typically what are called green dot cards, but essentially it's a prepaid ATM card where money can be put on the card, money can be taken off the card, and that is how offenders engage in essentially what is black market transactions. The third section is intended to help us with a small litigation problem. There was an appellate decision last year. Prisoners have essentially what's called 3 strikes when they're filing litigation against the department, and because of the way that this code section is currently worded, they get 3 strikes in state court and they get 3 strikes in federal court filing lawsuits against the department that once those are deemed to be frivolous, we want to count all 3. We want to count the 3 strikes, be it state or federal, so that we're not wasting the state's resources, particularly hiring SAGs if it's something that's being handled by someone outside the Attorney General's office. And that's really it in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, I'm going to open my mouth up on my own bill here. Are we talking about making it a felony for somebody that brings tobacco products?
We are. It is that
Really?
big a problem.
So if someone comes in to visit one of their loved ones, they've got chewing tobacco in their pocket or a pack of cigarettes in their pocket, they're guilty of this, correct?
That is true. But we also have signs up. We stop people at our front portals as they're going through the security measures. They can take it back out. Really what we're using this for is to interdict the packages of tobacco that are being snuck in. I probably could shock you all with stories of the very, very creative ways in which people on the inside and the outside work very hard to sneak things like tobacco and cell phones and drugs into our prisons. We deal with drones. We deal with packages being left outside the prison for our work details to find and sneak back in. We have people that hide material in vehicles and on vehicles. We have people that do try to sneak things in through visitation, although that's really probably the least of our concerns. We have people that try and throw things over the fences, and we have an extensive project going on right now to light up the exteriors of our prisons and to put up netting to prevent that. It is a constant battle all day, every day, to keep contraband out of the prisons.
All right. Mr. Glanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony this afternoon or evening now. But certainly, I understand the intent of what we're trying to do here, and to a degree, I agree. But what I find problematic is on line 33, the word shall and felony. I find that problematic. And also, I find problematic that this amounts to what we consider to be mandatory sentencing rather than being left at the discretion of the courts. And over a certain period of time, mandatory sentencing is something that can, at some point, have unintended consequences and put people that may have had such a situation occur that they shouldn't be found guilty of a felony, and they certainly shouldn't have a mandatory sentence of 1 to 10 years. I mean, would you respond to that?
Certainly, sir. The language that we've used in this portion of the bill is identical to all of the criminal code sections throughout the code, not only in this part of the code, but throughout Title 16, which is the criminal code. That's the way that these code sections are actually written. If there were language in there that said that the no portion of the sentence could be probated or suspended, then it would be a mandatory sentence that the court would not have any discretion about what amount of time to impose. But this gives the court that's hearing the case a range of potential sentences, and it could be probated. The entirety could be probated. There's no requirement that the time that is imposed as the sentence be time spent in incarceration.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go right ahead.
Part of my concern, or the basis for my concern, is that I've often visited the prisons to talk to individuals, the prison guards, et cetera, et cetera. And part of the problem is you have some innocent folk that are being intimidated, manipulated, and forced, i.e. the girlfriend or the wife or the mother, the grandmother, that are being forced to bring these things in or threatened if they don't. And so when we say that it's automatically, mandatorily a felony regardless of the stipulation without the courts having discretion, could you speak to that?
I'd be happy to, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. First and foremost, if someone is being forced to commit a criminal act, there's language elsewhere in the code that deals with coercion as an affirmative defense. And so if that's the case, if someone were being forced to do something like that, they could allege that they were being forced, and if that was found by the court hearing the case to be an appropriate defense, the charges would be dismissed. But I'm glad that you bring up our problem with coercion, because that's really the kind of problem that this particular portion of the bill is designed to address. It's part of the contraband problem that we're dealing with. We do have offenders who engage in very creative criminal activities. They do blackmail each other. They do blackmail each other's families. It's not unusual for an offender to reach out to the family to the folks who are at home waiting for a loved one to complete their sentence and tell them that the loved one is going to be hurt if they don't send money in. And that's the way that they send the money in, is through these green dot cards. Because we don't allow just anybody to put money on an offender's account, because we know about this problem. And we've done everything that we can to keep folks from using our legitimate funding systems for using the commissary and things like that. We only let the offender's family members that we've identified and checked to send money in that way. And that's the problem that the green dot cards pose for us, is it's a backdoor way for offenders to exchange money. If an offender in your family, for example, and I'm not saying that there is one, but if you had an offender in your family who was being blackmailed, the way that you would pay off that offender is with one of these green dot cards. And we want to stop the offenders. Unfortunately, we have a rampant problem at some facilities with offenders who blackmail people. They call up and tell people that they've missed jury duty and that if they send in money, they won't get arrested. Or they call up and pretend that they're the IRS and say that you haven't paid your taxes, but if you'll send money to one of these green dot cards, then you won't be arrested. This is a huge problem for us, and the good, honest, law-abiding citizens of Georgia are the victims, and we're trying to put an end to that with this bill.
One last follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I realize time is passing us, but just one last thing I'd like for you to, the department to consider is the incurred cost to proving that you were a victim of intimidation and manipulation and that you did this through coercion. Even though the law is there, there's still a cost to the individual to defend themselves and to prove as what I've said. So I'd just like for the department to kind of look at how we adjudicate this through the system as in a way that it is the least cost to that individual for proving themselves to be.
We actually have established a tip line. It's a toll-free number, and if an offender has a family member who's being blackmailed in this way, they can call and report it to our investigative services team, and we'll investigate that, and there's no cost to them at all for that. And that would prevent them from being caught doing something illegal and potentially prosecuted.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What is the current penalty under, like, I see where you're making this a felony, to go back to Representative Glanton's concerns, and no more 1 to 10 year mandatory sentencing. But right now, if you are somehow getting intoxicating liquor, amphetamines, biphetamines, or any other hallucinogenic drugs, if you're caught trying to get those into the prisons, what's the current penalty for that?
It's a 1 to 4 year felony. The only thing that we're changing in that part of the code is we're adding tobacco to that list.
So you're adding tobacco, and then on what you're being found guilty of, the penalty, you're adding 6 years to the possible extent.
No, sir, that's mixing two different things together. In Section 1, we're dealing with a code section that deals with one kind of contraband in Code Section 42-5-15, and that's the 1 to 4 year felony. In Section 2 of the bill, that's in
Okay.
Code Section 42-5-18, and that would be a 1 to 10 year felony.
For delivering the green dot cards. I mean, what is a green dot card?
It's a lot like your ATM card. It's online transactions where you would either go online or go into a store or potentially call a number using your credit card information, add money to someone else's account. That person can then spend that just like it's a credit card. They can load that money onto other cards. It's a big part of our contraband problem because that's how the corrupt activities that are going on inside the facilities are. That's the whole funding mechanism.
Okay, so currently, if you're trying to get money into the prison, not through a green dot, because obviously the technology is changing, so you're having to update code there. But if you're trying to get just cash in or something, what's the penalty for cash?
For cash, the penalty right now, it would only be a misdemeanor. We really don't have a problem with cash itself just because it's bulky, it's hard to move. The great thing about the green dot cards is all that you need is the 16-digit number. And when we conduct searches of our facilities, that's one of the things that we regularly find is documentation where they've got these 16-digit, essentially credit card numbers, and that's how they're moving their money around.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right. Well, now we've managed to shake up a couple of more folks. Matt?
Just
I
one
apologize.
question, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On Section 2 with the green dot card, in this line 33, a person who commits a violation of such subsection shall be guilty of a felony. Is there a dollar amount, or if it's $25, is it a felony? If it's $300, it's a felony. Less than $500, still a felony.
At this point, the language is worded so that any sort of transaction would be a felony. I'll be honest with you, it would be very unusual for us to have a small amount of money changing hands in this way. I can think of a case that I specifically worked on about 60 days ago. It involved about $8,500, and it actually involved a correctional officer who was being paid off. It's not small amounts of money.
But
I
if
do
you
understand
did,
your concern.
But if you did have a small amount, would it?
It would still be the same.
Still
That
be-
would be where the court would have the discretion to determine whether 1 year of probation or 2 years, all the way up to 10. That's where the court would exercise its discretion.
But it would still be a felony.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been to prison to visit, and got you, didn't I?
And I heard about the tobacco issue, but I also heard about the cell phones issue. Is there a reason why you're not including that as well?
The cell phones are actually addressed in another code section already. We
Okay.
don't need any statutory changes to address that, but I
Got it.
appreciate you asking.
Okay, thank you.
Number 15. Ms. Frazier?
Your favorite member here, Mr. Chairman.
Nice hat.
Thank you. I've also been to several prisons, and I do know the problem you have, especially with the cell phones. I've actually went out there really, really early in the morning, and the officers have showed me where the cell phones and other contraband has literally been thrown 100 feet over these big lines, and they're just lined up out there. I'm just concerned about the mandatory sentencing minimum, and it sounds like we need to do a little bit more work with the the green dot system, because if it's open to all of this negativity, it looks like we need to look back into finding another process on how they get used as credit card.
Well, they're not allowed to have access to the credit cards at all under the bill. It's not something that we're encouraging. It's something that they're doing subversively.
So tobacco is not allowed in the prisons, correct?
That's correct.
But it's a lot of tobacco in the prisons.
Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, that's why we're trying to increase the penalty so that they'll be deterred.
So are you open to possibly making this a minimum in the first offense or something, or instead of just making it mandatory on a first offense?
Well, I can't speak to the chairman. It's the chairman's bill, so I can't speak to what he's open to, but I certainly would be open to whatever
I'll ask
conversation.
my chairman. That's my chairman.
You can tell right off, this chairman ain't real happy when I saw tobacco in that.
We appreciate you carrying our bill, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just concerned about the mandatory. It needs to be like either first offense or something, but not just automatically giving them 1 to 10 years.
I think that part of the bill's gonna be worked on pretty dramatically. Tell you what, we'll hold this in the breast of the committee. And if y'all get with me and Ms. Ammons in a few minutes, I think we can probably work out. If we can't work it out, there's a guy sitting right on the end of the counter down there by the name of Julius, and no doubt in my mind that he'll be able to work this out and put it into proper legal language. Jennifer, would you mind waiting
I'm happy
shortly?
to, sir.
And we'll go over this.
Happy to.
We
Thank
have
you very
two
much.
bills left. Representative 292 by Representative Jaspers.
Chairman, is there any way I might be able to speak on 350? I'm sorry I wasn't able to sign up. I was outside.
Well, you just come right on up here.
I appreciate it very much.
This is the most, I'll be the most accommodating chair you've seen over here.
I'm so grateful, and I will be very brief, I promise. Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Dotson. I am the Public Policy Director at the Southern Center for Human Rights. I'm also a criminal defense lawyer. I'm here to testify on some concerns with Section 3 of the bill, and that is relating to this free strike provision that would prohibit someone from bringing a civil action once they have filed 3 informal pauperous petitions. The concern is the language seeks to add, I can actually give it to you, or that failed to state a claim upon which relief could be granted. The concern here is that these are people who are incarcerated and, as you know, without means, because they are filing an informal pauperous motion. We're talking about people without resources, a lack of education in most cases, a lack of understanding with legal research and the like, and we would penalize them for filing a claim for which it was dismissed because they didn't articulate pleadings well enough, they weren't clear with their facts. I want to stress that just because a petition is dismissed for the failure to state a claim, doesn't necessarily mean that the underlying case doesn't have merit. And I can give you some examples of how cases have been dismissed because the person didn't put in facts that were relevant, but it didn't mean that the case that they were asserting wasn't a legitimate concern. And so, again, before I give examples, I just want to say, when you're thinking of frivolous lawsuits or malicious lawsuits, when there is an intention to mess with the system and waste resources, it's clear why we have that language in the code as it exists now. The concern is, again, penalizing people from being able to pursue actions when it's not because they're trying to mess with the system, just because they didn't know how to articulate their pleading. So I'll give 2 examples. I had more, but I'll just give 2 examples. A few years ago in federal court, petitioner was stabbed while incarcerated. The case was dismissed because the petitioner was not able to demonstrate that the defendants had advanced knowledge of the risk to the individual, and they couldn't demonstrate similar inmate-on-inmate violence. So the court said, we're going to dismiss that claim. Didn't mean the person wasn't stabbed, doesn't mean that there wasn't underlying issues, but they didn't put enough facts in their petition to legitimate that claim. The second case I'll give is a petitioner alleged sexual assault by other inmates. He was handcuffed in his cell. The case was dismissed because the suit was dismissed because the officer who had handcuffed him did not have subjective knowledge that the prisoner was at risk, and he had failed to explicitly describe the nature of the assault or the need for prompt treatment. So those are just issues in the case that prevented that petition from moving forward. It wasn't, again, that this person was trying to bring and waste resources. Lastly, I'd say that as drafted, it seems that a person who had kind of violated this 3 strikes rule would be unable to petition for divorce in a civil proceeding because of this limitation. It would also mean that if later there is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that retroactively applies a constitutional rule, it would also prohibit individuals from being able to take advantage of whatever the change in the law has been. One other concern, lastly, I'll say this imminent danger exception here. The concern is, what happens if someone is trying to make this imminent danger petition? You know, I might have already lost my 3 strikes, but look, I really need you to look into this because my life is in danger. What if the trial court gets that wrong? That person has no other mechanism other than being able to pay to get on the docket to be able to deal with a situation like this. So again, I think that I understand where you're trying to go. I think this idea about double bites, you know, this idea you have 3 state strikes, you have 3 federal strikes, and trying to bring some consistency to that makes sense. But when you're thinking about, again, penalizing people without means for trying to exercise their rights when they're not trying to be frivolous or malicious, it seems unfair and killing to me. Brief enough, Chairman?
Not really,
Sorry.
but you know, you just won yourself an award. Do you mind, since you have got the argument, do you have some possible language change?
I can work on it.
Then you have just won the blue ribbon. I'd like for you and Ms. Ammons to get together and come up with some acceptable language. And I even see a former senator and a judge sitting back there since this stuff looks like, so you could even call him into this mix. And I'm gonna let y'all have at it as we move on. Do you, Mike, do you really want to speak?
And the fact that you asked a question, let me know
I believe I'd like to let them hash this out. All right, we have 2 more bills. House Bill 292 by Chairman Jaspers. Since we have decided that, and he has also asked that his bill be held. For a lot of you who may remember, this was the cleanup language that did some extensive work in a positive note toward the mental health issues and all. But, you know, we'll just hear this bill on the next meeting day. And then last but not least, we have Representative Hitchens, Chairman Hitchens' bill. And let us hope that this bill is in better shape than some that we've heard today.
That was going to be my first statement. It doesn't pertain to guns or property rights. However, it does have some information that could be construed as being involved in catastrophes. So I hope everybody's got the proper number. It's LC 411059S. The last version just came about. Here, she's got it now, handing it out. We worked on this all weekend and just this is the second version out today, so they're minor changes. And one thing I'd say before we get going is I think all parties involved in this are amenable to the bill. every issue that we've had has been addressed. And we ready? I come before you today with a bill that deals primarily with governor's emergency declaration incidents. And I think many of you know I served as Georgia's Homeland Security Director for a while, and I was Commissioner of Public Safety. I recently spoke at a group here from all over the world about all the emergencies that I'd seen going back to 1968. So I've been at most of them, and when there's one that takes a long time, I don't know how many people realize it, but most grocery stores in this state have a 4 to 6 day supply of food. And when local and state law enforcement start restricting movement in and out particularly after an event, when they worry about looters and people pilfering property, when they utilize vehicles, the large tractor trailers that aren't marked, many times they have difficulties for getting through. Several years ago, when I was in the Department of Public Safety, we started issuing ID cards to media personnel. They were having trouble getting through. Everybody purports to be in the media, and with no readily identifiable ID, it's just a discretion of the law enforcement officer present as whether he lets them through or not. So what's been devised here is that the Homeland Security GEMA will provide an ID card for those people who are certified as providing necessities that may be needed in a time of a disaster when it's extended, so that they can bring in certain products like food, water, fuel, medical supplies, building or repair products. It does not change the fact that the law enforcement people can determine the means of travel or where the ingress and egress. They have to go through certain places. They can violate the curfew with the permission of the law enforcement personnel, but as soon as they complete their delivery, they must leave the area. It also provides a provision in there that just occurred down at Hurricane Matthew a couple of months ago, in that people were trying to get on to St. Simon's Island, and some people had some pretty good excuses, and they tried to use law enforcement to help them on several occasions, but the DOT had not approved any of the bridges for structural safety, and it has a provision in here that DOT has to approve the roadways and the bridges before they can enter, and that's essentially the bill.
Questions? Questions from any of the committee members? Isn't this interesting?
I should have gone first.
Either that or everybody's beat down. I see the director of GEMA. Homer, I'm sorry, Mr. Director, do you have, wish to make a comment about this? Everything copacetic in here? Thank you so much. Chairman Jaspers.
Just, Mr. Chairman, just on, I was approached about this early this morning, but grocery store folks, they're good, right?
Oh, yes, sir. Some of them are sitting over here.
I see waves from Publix, and great. Tim,
and
thank you
a lot
very
of
much.
people, I live in Savannah. Their supply comes out of Atlanta, so it's a long trip down there, in 4 to 6 days. And we all know when a hurricane predicted, the water, the bread, the milk all disappears before it even starts. So, oh, that's exactly. Yeah, I got a place in LJ. I've done that too. So.
Now, who are the people in the retail business that have interest in this? Could they stand up? I just like to see them, just because they never come to this committee meeting. They never have an issue in front of this committee. It's good to have y'all here today. All right. Are there any questions from any of the committee members? If not, what's the wishes of this committee on this bill?
Second.
I'm impressed. We have a motion and a second to pass along House Bill 405, LC 41-1059S. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. 57S. Well, 59S, I'm sorry. I got two copies here.
59S. All right, as a committee substitute. Is there any further discussion, any comments? Anybody wishes to be heard, pro or con? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And ayes clearly have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for being here. There will probably be another meeting called for some pressing legislation later on this week. And it may not be near as lengthy, get much length given for commentary at that point. Thank you so much for being here. Indeed.